former Secretary Brown and now Governor Brown, is recognizing that in the DMV records of the state, 90% of the eligible voters are already identified. They have driver's license or state ID number. So if you take that 90% and put them on the rolls and give them the option to opt out as opposed to the option to opt in, then you can focus your resources on the 10% who aren't represented in that file. I think I don't know that the percentage matches exactly in California, but I think that there's validity in that. And I think that that's a great example of how we're still conducting elections and the voter registration process the way it was conducted in the 60s and 70s. And I think that proposal tells a story of how we could modernize the process, repurpose those resources. We spend a lot of money processing voter registration applications in LA County.
Do you have any data on that? I mean, one of the issues we always get in these situations is cost, we need more money. But the reality is if you don't have to process all these applications, it's a cost avoidance issue, pretty significant cost avoidance issue.
That's absolutely correct.
Have you done any diagnostics, just back of the envelope on that to determine new cost versus cost of avoidance as to what this would cost? Any ideas? Any sense on that?
I can provide you with some analysis that I did simply on what we currently pay for the voter registration process. And I would agree with you. I think the vast majority of those resources would go away in a system like that. I mean,
yeah, it's kind of like the suggestion I have legislation, which we'll probably call you up on, that deals with sending out everybody a ballot. I had 8 pieces physically that I got from you in an envelope when I applied. I had to go out and apply, mail it in, and then I have 8 pieces where you could just simply add, whether you do a tear off on the back or something that's convenient to make that work, a lot less cost. I think we'll analyze that. The next question is, it had been suggested to me that possibly the Medi-Cal or the covered California could be a place where you could mine additional names for an automatic registration system. Have you had to give any thought to that?
I have, and I think what I would mention is there is a program that was developed by the Pew Center on the Trust, their election initiatives program, that is available today to California to participate in. It's called the Electronic Records Information Center, and its sole purpose is to take data from existing public databases, merge that together to both identify changes in status of existing registered voters, but also to identify in a very targeted way the eligible unregistered population in a state, and to allow you then to target your resources to going after those who are not currently registered. And it uses that same model, just as you were saying. It takes state agency data, national databases, it mines that data, and California has the opportunity to participate in it. And the great thing about that is it's still in its infancy, so we would have the opportunity to influence the further development of that. I think there are about 8 states that are currently participating in that. The key to that, I think legislatively, the key to that is we would have to authorize the release of our, on a minimum to enter into it, we would have to authorize the release of our DMV data to the ERIC project, and then we could also look at other state databases. But I think minimum for entry is the voter file and the DMV database.
Last question, Mr. Chairman, and that is, have you had a chance at all to look at the notion of weekend voting? I mean, just the idea that you're in the middle of the week, you're dealing with your kids, taking them to school, you got to go to work, and then you got to find time to go to the polls if you're someone who likes to go to the polls as opposed to an absentee voter. Have you given any thought to that?
Absolutely, and that is a cornerstone of the voting modernization process that we're working on in LA County. I think that, as other speakers have said, that the notion that we vote on a random Tuesday between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. is outdated. We know, again, despite those administrative obstacles, we still have lots of voters who trek out to Norwalk on the weekends before the election.
I saw that, yeah.
On Sunday before the election is a particularly busy day. We need to expand that option, and we need to make that available throughout the county. And what's held us back on that has been the delay in moving forward with technology in California that would support. Obviously, we have 300 plus ballot styles throughout the county. So we need to have a system that will give us the ease, so if you walk into a vote center in the library downtown or out in Van Nuys or in
I get my
Allendale,
ballot.
that we get you the right ballot.
Right. But isn't that doable? I mean, I've looked at that. I mean, we do that in the private sector all the time. You just have something, you put in your precinct number or what your address is, and you print it out. Doesn't seem to me to be very difficult. Technologically, we do that all the time
It's
the
not,
internet.
the model of it is not difficult technology-wise. The problem is the technology we're using in LA County is, by and large, the technology that was introduced in the 1968 presidential election.
I'm
And
sorry, don't you have the, we did a $200 million bond that I did when I was in government. Didn't you get a piece of that money? I remember.
we have that money, and we are using that for this project. We have been prevented from moving forward due to the inability to get new systems certified in the state of California. SB 360 has moved that needle, and we should be in a position to do that.
Have you modeled the weekend costs as to what that's going to cost if you have to keep people at polls and stuff? Have you given, as part of your analysis to determine the cost? It's always a barrier.
What I would recommend is that we do a cost offset on that based on a gradual tracking of how many people utilize those regional vote centers, and then begin to reduce the number of polling places on election day, and it will cover those costs.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Senator. Okay, I'd love you to kind of talk a little bit more about some of your vision for the future, to the extent that you're allowed to discuss it. But we've talked a little bit about some of the elements. You've talked about vote centers. I mean, can you sort of chart it out a little bit more for the folks listening?
Sure. I think the core elements of the Voting Systems Assessment Project in LA County are and it is based on a voter-centered model. I mean, all of the design and the research that's gone into this project has been based on talking directly with voters about their experience. Much of what you heard today is represented in that dialogue. We hear all the time from voters who tell us that the current process is, I talked to a group of students the other night who described the current voting process in LA County as old, cold, and impersonal. And as a person who spends my professional life working in that environment, that's painful to hear. So we need to turn that around. So the process that we're looking at, first and foremost, is a publicly owned, publicly operated voting system that has the ability to meet the needs of voters today and the way that they interact today, but also has the ability to adapt to changes in voter behavior and advances in technology in the future. So with that said, what we contemplate implementing is this vote center model. It would include touchscreen interface voting equipment, different than the direct recording electronic voting equipment you heard about earlier today. It would be what we refer to as ballot marking devices that would allow the voter to view the ballot in whatever language they desired. It would have accessibility components that would allow voters with disabilities to vote independently and to use accessible technology. But at the end of that voting experience, it would produce a paper, human-readable ballot that shows the voter the choices that they select. That ballot would then go into a ballot box and would be tabulated independent of that marking device. In addition to that, we envision what we're referring to as an interactive sample ballot. This gets to the issue of socializing the voting experience and taking advantage of the mobile technology that's out there. I think direct voting on mobile devices and over the internet has challenges, and I think is a ways off. But what we can do is socially interact with voters. We can give them a sample ballot that they can do their research, mark in advance of going in to vote. They can take it with them to vote, much the way you do a boarding pass, scan it in at the voting location, verify that their selections were read correctly, and then cast the ballot and put that into the ballot box. It would also allow for the ability to take advantage of some of the socialized apps that are out there in terms of getting direct access to candidate information, measure information, to sharing opinions with colleagues and peers in ways that aren't encouraged by today's voting process. So I think those are the two major components of that. It's not an overly complicated process. I think what's been complicated is navigating the regulatory environment and the limited market that's been available for voting systems, and essentially, quite candidly, in Los Angeles County, we've just decided to plow past that and to work on a publicly owned, publicly operated system that we will put out for competitive bid.
So when you say this, when you mention the regulatory market, what can we do to help you with your task from a state legislator's perspective with regards to raising turnout and implementing these kinds of reforms?